I call the Honourable David Parker.
Mr Speaker, we've got a Minister of Finance who can't just balance who cannot merely not balance a budget, 7 deficit budgets in a row. He cannot address the long-term challenges of the economy. And the greatest failure of the Minister of Finance and his offsider Stephen Joyce is that after 7 years in government, the fundamental indicators of this economy are still going backwards. Mr Speaker, we've had reports from the likes of Paul Glass at Devon Investments and the Herald recently showing how real per capita GDP, when you strip out Christchurch, has been increasing at less than 1% per annum. So when you take out the effect of Christchurch and the effect of the huge, rapid increase in population caused by immigration, real growth is less than 1% per annum. The export target is trashed. The export target was to increase exports from 30 to 40% of GDP. This year, exports have been 27.9% of GDP, and 27.9. The next year they're predicted to be 26.4% of GDP, and they don't get over 27% of GDP to the end of the forecast period. So much for the target of growing exports as a percentage of the economy. Mr Speaker, in respect of New Zealand's net liabilities to the rest of the world as a percentage of the economy, as a consequence, they keep growing. New Zealand's net international liabilities are currently about 69% of GDP. They grow every year here on to 75% of GDP. When you've got long-term problems like that, you don't reduce your savings, because the savings are the key to investment. Now let's look a bit at history here. When KiwiSaver was first planned, John Key said this. This is his release on the 24th of August 2006. This is confirmation that National was right all along. The scheme's initial design lacked the incentives needed for people to change their savings behaviour. Well, we've heard from Dr Clark how the scheme has increased savings, but now we've got National reducing the incentives that John Key said then were inadequate. Now, what have they done so far, this government? This government, first off, on the 9th of December 2008, the minimum contribution rate for members was decreased from 4% to 2%. John Key had also already criticised it being too low at 2% as it happens. Then, on the 1st of April 2009, the member fee subsidy of $40 per annum, they cut that. Then, the third thing they did was they changed the compulsory employer contribution and capped that at 2% as well. So they cut the employer contribution. Then next, they took away the tax credit that applied to the employer contribution, cut number 4. The fifth thing they did was reduce the member tax credit. They halved it from $1,042 to $520 per annum. And then the sixth thing they did was they changed the taxation treatment of the employer contribution to the detriment of savers. And then the seventh thing they did, the seventh fiddle thing, was they then, having cut the contribution rate, they increased it from 2% to 3%. So they reversed their reversal. And now we've got them doing this. We've got them doing away with the $1,000 kickstart. Now, how does this work in practice? They say it's going to save $500 million, and it will. So they're removing $500 million of incentives for the scheme. What's the effect of this? And I'll give you a real example of this. And this is the example of my daughter. My daughter's, she's in a middle-class family. She's not hard up. She's a 15-year-old. She's got a job working as a cafe as a waitress. She gets the $1,000 kickstart because she signed up recently, and she adds to her savings by about $2 or $3 a week. And she follows that. Now look, if you're a young person and you're starting at $2 or $3 a week, and after the first few months you've got less than $20, it seems like nothing. It seems like nothing. If you're a part-time worker, as most young people are when they first into the workforce, and you're saying you want to encourage them to get a savings habit for a lifetime, and they're saving at $2 or $3 per week, it really seems like nothing for the first few years. But because of the incentives in the scheme, currently she sees a balance of $1,000 and $2. And then $1,000 and $4, and then $1,000 and $6. And she feels really successful that she is embarking upon a savings pattern that will see her right for life, and it will. And everyone else who's in that situation will be so much better off when they get to the age of retirement if they've started to save. But now, a lot of those people, instead of having more than $1,000, which will grow by a small amount every month, or every week that they get paid, those kids are only going to have that small amount. This is stealing from the next generation in order to get to a make-believe surplus. That's what this is. It is, and this is in the face of dropping exports, rising international debt, and failure to the government to make their own targets. Mr. Speaker, what's that? It was better than this. It was better than this. Mr. Speaker, the record of the government in every area of superannuation, the record of the government in savings and superannuation is worse on every front. Do you know, they canned contributions to the New Zealand Superannuation Fund. The New Zealand Superannuation Fund, which Bill English, when it was set up, said it was a dog. Those are the exact words he used, only to be embarrassed last year at the 10th year anniversary when he turned up and celebrated it being one of the best sovereign wealth funds in the country, in the world, the only one in the country of any significance, one of the best ones in the world. You know what happened in the meantime? In the meantime, the government, they ceased contributions in 2010, at a time when the world's interest rates are at the lowest than they've been in many generations. They said, we're not going to incur that small amount of Crown debt at historically low interest rates to invest. Well, what's happened to the super fund since? Well, you know, the New Zealand guardians of the super fund, they estimate it. This is not controversial. They show their rates of return every year, and they show how much would be in the fund if they had made these contributions. The capital contribution is $16.3 billion worse. New Zealand is $16.3 billion worse off than if they had contributed to the scheme as they were meant to do. Mr. Speaker, on every front they get it wrong, and then they pretend on the other side that they are good managers of the economy. Mr. Speaker, why did they get cleaned out in Northland? Why did they get cleaned out in Northland? Because the people know that is just rubbish. That's rubbish. Exports as a percentage of GDP are down. They've got no long-term plan. Mr. Speaker, a good government builds a country. Everywhere you look, they can't build a country. They can't build a country metaphorically, neither can they build a country physically. They don't know how to build houses, and they don't know how to build an economy. They tear away at the foundations of future growth. They did eventually get to the point, and the minister was good enough to say this in his introduction, that KiwiSaver is a good scheme that they still believe in, just not enough to keep it working properly. Mr. Speaker, this sort of short-termism is awful. No solutions, despite the fact that their own budget documents released just this week show exports dropping this year and next, never getting much over 27%, never hitting 28% of GDP to the end of the forecast period. Look at them, they're quiet now. They know that they have not met their target of raising exports to 40%. A failing government, no ideas on exports, Mr. Speaker. Debt rising, New Zealand's got high international liabilities, and yet those keep rising too because we do not cover the costs of our imports and our interest bill and our outgoings for dividends through the value of our exports and our overseas earnings. And as long as we've got a government who won't invest in production, that trend will continue.